Today's daf, we're going to be learning a Shevuot, daf Lamed Gimel. We're going to get started and finish up the very last part of the previous Mishnah, and from there we'll move on to two new Mishnayot. So, Ayush Deiki Te'idim. If you remember the Mishnah, it said we're starting at the bottom of Lamed Bet and Lamed Bet. There were two groups of witnesses. Kafra Rishona v'achar kach Kafra Shniya. If the first denied knowing testimony and then the second one denied knowing testimony, we said that we're going to make both liable to bring a sacrifice for both denying testimony. Now the problem is we understand why the second one, in order to be liable, Shvuot do it means you're the only witnesses there are. So when the second ones testify and say, we don't know anything, it makes sense because the first one's already denied and they were the only ones left. But Ela Rishona, Amai, Hakai Mishnia. But when the first one says we're not going to testify, why should they be liable? There's going to be another group. So they haven't really denied the claimant from trying to get what the claimant wants because there's another group of witnesses. So what's the big deal if they don't come? I'm a Ravina. So Ravina comes to explain, and he does what we call an ukimta. And it's a very unique ukimta. We're going to basically say this mission is only in a very, very, very unique type of case. It's an example of, but there's not that many that could be, and it would be very rare that this would actually happen, which again is kind of taking the Mishnah out of the simple reading of the Mishnah, which always begs the question, is that really what the Mishnah meant? The second group, when the first group denied knowing testimony, the second group was kind of non-existent in terms of the world of testifying. Why? Well, what would be non-existent? Let's say they're related to each other. Okay, they could also be related to the claimant in the same way. It's just an example. Let's say they're related to each other through their wives. So each of the two witnesses they're each married to two sisters. Unishotehen gosisot. In addition to the fact that you have to explain the cases, they're both married to two sisters, it would have to be that the witnesses are married to two sisters who are about to die. Okay, now why about to die? Because that's the big chidush. If they were sisters, there wouldn't even be a question here. Like, of course it would be obvious, or you wouldn't even need to bring this case. The point is both sisters are about to die, which means that momentarily they're actually going to be able to testify together. Ma'u detema, you might have thought, Rov gosasim lemita. Well, most people who are on their deathbed actually die. So maybe you would consider it as if they are witnesses, and then you wouldn't make the first ones liable, because anyway, there's a group of witnesses that could come forward. Kamash malan, even though it's in parentheses, I'm going to read it. Hashtami alo shachiv. They haven't yet died. So since they haven't yet died, right at this present moment, there is no other there are no other witnesses that could come forward because the only ones that can are disqualified witnesses because they're married to two sisters. Even though they're about to die, it doesn't make a difference because right now they're not dead. So at that moment that the first witnesses testified, there really were no other witnesses. And that's why we would obligate the first witnesses. But from here, it sounds like the sisters were no longer alive, right? Or any other case where there's a second group of witnesses, then you wouldn't actually obligate the first group. Moving now to the next Mishnah. משביע אני עליכם, אם לא תבואו ותעידוני שיש בי הפלוני, פיקדון ותשומת יד, גזל ואבדה. Okay, so that's what we have in the Mishnah, a list of cases. Like here we have pikadon, tzumet yad, which is, so pikadon, basically let's explain the case and then I'll go back to what I wanted to say right now, which is the claimant comes to witnesses and says, listen, you know that this person, the other person that I'm fighting with, has in their possession a pikadon, something I loaned them to watch, I gave them to watch. A tzumet yad, that means a loan out. Okay, they haven't paid me money back from a loan. They also stole from me, gazel, and aveda. And they also have a lost item of mine they haven't returned. Now, right, obviously a lost item that they should be returning, right? Some lost items you can keep. This would be a lost item they have to return. Now, sometimes in the Mishnah we have a vav connecting all these things, and it just means this or that or that or that. In our case, it's going to be clear from the continuation. They mean this and that and that and that. So basically, the claimant says, you know testimony for four things for me with this one person. And then Shvua she'ein anu yodim l'chayedut. Now, if the witnesses respond and say, we swear we don't know anything, and just the word anything, okay, we don't have testimony for you, and don't specify in pikadon and sumat yad and gezel and avidah, and chayavin elachat, they're only liable one because they took an oath, we don't have testimony for you. However, Shvua she'ein anu yodim sheyesh chabiyah ploni pikadon utsumat yad v'gezel v'avidah. But if they themselves went forward and said, listen, the guy says, come testify for me. And they say, we swear we don't owe you, right? We don't know any testimony for you, not in the picado, not in a loan, not in a stolen item, not in a lost item. And they specify all those four things in their oath. Then they're liable for each one separately. Okay, they're going to have to bring 4 korbanot, even though it was one oath, but because they themselves specified the 4 different categories of things that they don't know about, and they really obviously would have to be where they knew all 4 things, then they'd be liable for each one. And likewise, okay, so again, the person says, the claimant, come testify for me, right? And I'll make you swear that you know testimony for me, that, in other words, I'll make you swear that you, right, basically come testify for me, and if not, take an oath that you don't know anything, not in a picadon, something I gave to this person to watch, both wheat, barley, and spelt. If they come and say, yes, we swear we don't know anything, they only are liable one. But if they specify each 3 in their oath, then they'll be liable for all 3. Okay? Seemingly, there's no major difference between the first 2 cases, right? We've seen cases like this before where the Mishnah just gave a lot of different detailed cases, really with the same principle. And in fact, the Gemara is not even going to go into these. It's going to interest the Gemara is the next case. Okay, what's the next case? Mashpia ani alechem. Im lo tavo v'tiyiduni sheyesh bi ploni nezek v'chatzi nezek tashlumei kefal v'tashlumei arba v'chabisha. Now here, by the way, the vavs are or. Okay, any one of these things. Okay, now we're not talking about a whole slew of things, but we're talking about if it were a case of nezek, damages. If it were a case of, and this is going to lead us to the next Mishnah, which is basically going to say, the Shevuot HaEdut is only relevant for monetary cases. Okay, and these are all monetary. So what is it? Damages or chatzi nezek. What's chatzi nezek? Usually it's the main case of chatzi nezek is when a shore that hadn't yet gored 3 times, gores someone, causes damage, you pay half damages. Okay, causes, damages to property, to another animal. Okay, you pay half damages because you weren't expected to really know. And we'll talk about the nature of half damage payment in the Gemara. Tashlumei kefal, double payment. You steal, you have to pay the principal, and you have to pay another double payment as a knas, as a penalty. Tashlumei arba v'chamisha. If you steal certain animals, there's a 4 times payment or a 5 times payment. Also, right, made up of the principal and the knas, the penalty, the fine. V'shanas ish ploni et biti upitat biti. This person raped my daughter, right? Again, come testify that you saw somebody rape my daughter or seduce my daughter. Again, what's the punishment? Well, in this case, it's a knas, it's a fine. You have to pay a certain amount of money, 50 kesef. But it's also not just a knas. Okay, you pay for the father of the girl. So the father's, bringing someone to court, bringing the witnesses to testify. But we're going to see in addition to that, there's also humiliation you pay. If there's damage to the girl, there's also monetary payments. Okay, we're going to see that most of these they seem like knas penalty payments, but it's not fines, which means, it's not you cause damage and you pay back the damage. It's that Torah instituted, you have to pay a penalty for this. But we're going to see that they seem to be made up maybe of a combination. You'll understand why we're getting there when we start the Gemara. Shikani bini, okay, my son hit me. Okay, now when your son hits you, okay, if your son hits and draws blood, there's a death penalty. There's no monetary payment because whenever there's death penalty, remember it overrides the monetary payment. But this would be testify that my son hit me and didn't cause blood to come out, but did cause me a wound and has to pay damages. That's monetary payment. Then someone says, come testify for me that somebody hit me, not a father, not a parent child, but someone else so say someone hit me and owes me damages, or or damage my property, my field on Yom Kippur. Okay, both these things are a Yom Kippur. Now, on Yom Kippur, theoretically, there's a much harsher punishment, and therefore it should be kimle. It shouldn't be a monetary punishment, but it has to be monetary. Otherwise, what's it doing in our Mishnah? Because I told you that what I do is only money. claims, monetary claims. Well, the issue is that Yom Kippur, you actually get curry. You don't get punished by the court. Since you don't get punished by the court, well, you actually could get lashes. But remember, there's this whole debate about kimle b'derabamine. Does it apply in a curry case, right? So this Mishnah holds that it doesn't apply when there's curry, even though you could get lashes for it. But you could theoretically, there's a machloket, you loka mishalem or not, without getting into too much detail. But since it's curry, it doesn't override the monetary payment, and there is monetary payment here. So all those cases are elu chayavim. The witnesses would be liable for, again, lying under oath if they don't know testimony for all these monetary cases. So now the Gemara asks, Ibayelu, mashbia ede knas mahu. What if you have these edim who know about a fine, a penalty that you're supposed to pay, not a monetary compensation payment. That's what monetary is. You're compensating someone for the loss caused to them. A penalty, a fine is something, it's not compensating you for monetary loss. It's just you did something, you have to pay a fine. Okay, so what's the case? Since we said it's mammon, okay, edut, Shevuot edut is for monetary. Well, does monetary include knas? We always have this issue of knas. It's kind of in a different category. Okay, one of the main differences, and we're going to talk about that right now, is that modeh b'knas patur. If the Baal Din comes forward and admits that they owe the money, they don't have to pay knas. So let's say tashlumet kefil. Let's say you steal from me, and then you come to court and admit that you stole. So you'll only have to pay me the keren, you won't have to pay me the knas. Okay, but let's say it's only a knas payment, and then you admit it, you won't have to pay me anything. So the question is, okay, now we're going to limit the question a little bit, depending on your side. Okay, it's a little bit complicated, this part. This is the complicated part for today. We're going to have two opinions, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the rabbis, about this modeh b'knas patur halacha. And we're going to say that the question is only asked according to the rabbis in that machloket and not according to Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, and you'll see why in a minute. What's going to get a little complicated is once we determine that the question is, before we even get to an answer, we're determining according to who in this machloket is the question. We're going to limit it just to the rabbis, not to Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon. It's not a question according to him because the answer is obvious. And then within the rabbis, we're going to limit it even further based on a machloket about something else, which coincidentally happens to be also between Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the rabbis. Okay, but we'll get there soon. Let's start with the first part, and then we'll get to the second part. We'll explain. So the Gemara immediately says, before they even try to answer the question, I'll leave it to Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, in a machloket, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the rabbis have in Bava Kama, lo tibailach. There's obviously no question. It's obvious. Why? What does Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon say there? Da'amal yavo edim v'ya'idu. Let's say we said that modeh b'knas patur. So if somebody comes into court and admits they did something wrong where they're chayav a knas, they're exempt. What if witnesses come? Okay, now if witnesses come before they admit in court, obviously they're liable. You can't come later and say, oh, I admit it now, not. But what if the witnesses come after the person was modeh and exempted themselves, and then witnesses come? So according to Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, then the person is not exempt anymore because the witnesses come forward, they can obligate, even though, right, this is somewhat perhaps to avoid a case where the person sees the witnesses are coming, so he runs into court and says, oh, I'll admit I did this, and then get exempt. So according to Rabbi Lazar, I don't know if that's the only reason why he says it, but according to Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, if there's witnesses, there's an obligation. So let's take that to our question. If that's the case, since for sure these witnesses, by not testifying, they're causing a monetary loss to the claimant, because it doesn't matter if the person admits or not, they're definitely going to have to pay the knas if the witnesses come forward. It doesn't matter at what stage the witnesses come into court. They can obligate. Of course, they're going to be liable to Shevuot ha'edut because it's a definite, you don't testify, and since you lied and you know testimony, you're causing a loss, a monetary loss to the claimant. So obviously, you're going to be liable to korban. So ki tebailach aliba de Rabbanan amrei modeh b'knas v'achar kach ba'u edim patur. The question is only according to the rabbi's position there in Bava Kama, who says that if you're modeh b'knas and then the witnesses come, you're exempt. So now the question becomes, since these witnesses don't come forward, right? You could say 50-50, or it's some sort of percentage of a chance that they could be causing a loss or could not. And this is why knas is a question. Since if two witnesses know testimony for someone, let's say for me. They know testimony for me, and they don't come forward. Now, if the other side can admit in court that they did it and not have to pay me anything, well, then the witnesses didn't necessarily cause me a loss. On the other hand, maybe they did because maybe the person won't admit it in court, and then there will be an obligation, and the witnesses didn't testify, and now too bad, I lose out. So that's really the question according to the rabbis. But even within the rabbis, we're going to fine tune this a little bit more. And we're going to say, and this is going to connect with the sugya we learned yesterday. Remember the sugya about mashbiah, eid echad? Okay, if they try to take one witness who knows testimony and get that witness to take an oath, and the witness, and get the witness to testify, and the witness doesn't, right? Is there an obligation, korbanah edut or not? Do they have to bring a sacrifice? And what's the issue? Remember, it was based on this davar hagorem lemamon kemamon dami, and coincidentally, it was also a machlok between Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the rabbis. And there, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon said, davar hagorem lemamon kemamon dami, even though it might potentially, right? The Shevuot eid echad doesn't necessarily cause, because the person can just take an oath and exempt themselves. On the other hand, if the person is not willing to take an oath, because Shevuot eid echad, right? Oh, in eid echad, one witness testifying can cause the other person an obligation, or does cause the other person an obligation to take an oath. So they can take an oath and just never pay. And then the other side isn't losing anything because the person will take the oath. On the other hand, if the person doesn't take the oath, they'll actually have to pay if they don't want to take an oath for whatever reason. So they could potentially be causing a loss to the other side. Now, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon said, we don't care if they could potentially, not potentially, Tavar Goyim, the Mamon is like Mamon. And it's what they do, even though it's only, let's say, a 50-50 chance, or again, some sort of percentage here. So now they're going to say the following. Now that right now, even though it's the same people arguing, and we said already, we're only talking according to the rabbis, because according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, it's obvious what the answer would be. But now they're suggesting that the rabbis and the Machloket and Baba Kama aren't necessarily the same rabbis who are arguing with Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon here. So now they're telling us, if we're asking the question according to the rabbis there, we would have to ask the question only if the rabbis there agree with the rabbis here. Because if the rabbis there in Baba Kama about the issue of the admission, which exempts you from knas, even if witnesses come later, the question would still only be true, we're like limiting within this, if those rabbis held like the rabbis in the machloket we discussed yesterday. Okay, we'll read it inside now and hopefully you'll understand. So now they're going to say, Rabbanan da hatam keman svirul, the rabbis there in Baba Kama say, right, and that the whole question is only according to them. If they hold, though, okay, now again, let's just get it clear. If the rabbis hold on the issue of the knas, once the plaintiff says, I admit I owe the money, they're exempt, and the witnesses won't be able to do anything. So again, now that hasn't happened yet, but it's maybe our witnesses who lied now and said, I don't know any testimony, could have obligated, but maybe didn't. Well, if they hold like Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, the davar hagorim lemamon kemamon dami, if there's a potential it might cause financial loss, then we consider that a monetary issue and you're obligated. Well, hakamar. They said then, davar hagorim lemamon kemamon dami, and again, there would be no question. It would be obvious. We're trying to figure out where is there a question. There's only a question according to the rabbis in the first machloket and according to the rabbis in the second machloket. You'd have to say the rabbis follow that position in order to even ask this question. Because if they follow Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon on the davar hagorim lemamon kemamon dami issue, then even then we would say, okay, well, 50-50 chance, maybe the person will admit and there'll be no payment, but maybe they won't. And then these witnesses could have caused a monetary loss to the claimant, and therefore they're obligated because davar hagorim lemamon is like mamon, even though it's, maybe, maybe not. Ella kirabanan dahacha, but it must be that we're asking the question according to the rabbis here who say davar hagorim lemamon lav kemamon dami. So now let's put it all together and let's explain our question. So our question is according to the rabbis of Baba Kama who hold, since, right, if the person admits, then there'll be no payment. It's knas payment, and there's no payment if the person admits. However, if the person doesn't admit, then the potentially by these, right, if the person doesn't admit, then these witnesses are preventing the claimant from getting their payment, his payment or her payment. So now they say, here's the question. Kevan de ilu mamo miftar lav mamona kakafrala. Now, again, and you say davar hagorim lemamon, since there's a potential for mamon, it's not necessarily considered mamon yet. But now you say, Kevan ilu modem miftar lav mamona kakafrala. Since if the person wants to admit, the plaintiff wants to admit, well then they would have no payment. So these witnesses aren't really causing a loss at all. Oh, Dilma hashtami alo ode. Or do we say, but at this point there was no admission? Who's to say there's going to be an admission? And therefore, they could be causing a loss because at this present moment, if everything stays the same and the witnesses are coming to court right now, and the plaintiff hadn't sworn hadn't admitted in court, then actually they would be causing a loss because if the witnesses come first, then obviously the plaintiff has to pay. So that's the question. And that was all a very long-winded way of getting to what's our question. Okay? Our question is according to the rabbis in the Machloket and Bava Kama about witnesses who come after and testify after the admission, since in that case they'd be exempt, right? The plaintiff would be exempt. So it's not clear, right? And it's Davar Goyim Mamon is not necessarily Mamon. So would there be an obligation here of Shevuot Eidu? In order to answer this question, we're going to bring our Mishnah. It's the best proof because our Mishnah is talking about all sorts of Knas cases. And what do you see in right? Imagine this question was asked like before they even read our Mishnah. And now they go to our Mishnah to say, wait, our Mishnah listed several cases that were Knas cases. And that would be the perfect proof. It says the witnesses are liable for lying about that they didn't know testimony. So that would prove that a Knas case in Shevuot Eidu would be liable. So that's what they're going to try to do. So that's the first attempt to prove. It's going to be kind of several attempts, but all from within our Mishnah. In the end, they're not going to be successful. They're going to bring another source, and in the end, they're going to reject that as well, and we're going to end up with no answer to this question. Tashma, mashbi'ani alechem im lo tavoi v'tiyiduni sheish libi ploni nezek v'chatzi nezek. Okay, obviously nezek is money, but chatzi nezek is knas. V'ha chatzi nezek knasehu. Now, why is it a knas? Because if my ox gored your ox, and it had never done anything before, like goring anyone before, and then gored your ox and caused your ox damages, well, I'm really not supposed to be obligated to anything because I wasn't supposed to protect my shore from goring. Most oxen don't gore. Okay, they might eat, chain, regel, remember, trample things that's assumed. But goring and causing damage is not assumed. And therefore, the fact that we make me pay half damages is just a knas so that, I protect my animal from, otherwise I'll let my animal do whatever my animal wants. So it's a knas. So now they say, what do you mean? Command Amr, right? And then we would have a proof. Look, it's a knas payment. It's listed in our Mishnah. There is Shevuot Eidu. There's your answer. There's Shevuot Eidu even for knas. So the answer, no, command Amar, Palgan is kamamona. Maybe you could say the Mishnah is following the opinion, because the way I explained it so clearly right now is not necessarily the only way to understand it. Some people say the chatzi nezek is a mammon payment. Really, my oxen caused damages. I should have to pay full damages. But the rabbis or the Torah, cut it down to half and said, well, since this never happened before and it wasn't you who did the damages, we'll drop it to half. But then it's a mammon payment that we drop to half. Right? It's either 0 that we up and add a penalty, or it's 100% that we drop down to 50%. If you do that, it's a mammon payment. And then you could say, well, if you say palganezek is mammon, then this teaches you nothing about our case. So they say, okay, so palgan is kamamona. So if you say palgan is kamamona, so we're going to have the question. But what if you say it's knas? Then maybe you have an answer to the question from our Mishnah. So they say, Chatzi nezek tzrorot. You could say that the Mishnah is actually now talking about chatzi nezek that we just explained of the short tam who gores another ox. But maybe it's chatzi nezek of tzrorot. What's tzrorot? This is when my animal is walking, normally doing its normal thing, and kicks rocks. And those rocks damage something else. Now, this is what we call indirect damages. It's like even more indirect because it's not only did, if I cause indirect damages, that's one thing. This is my ox that I'm responsible for cause indirect damages to something else. And there it's called, the damages are chatzi nezek, half damages. Now, hilchata gemira l'adam, and it's known that it's halach l'moshe misinai, it's passed down as tradition, that this chatzi nezek tzrorot payment, the fact that you pay half damages for this, is a mammon payment. It's not a penalty. Again, what's the difference penalty and mammon? Mammon is I'm compensating you for the damages caused. Knas is kind of like you're not really liable damages, but the Torah or the rabbis instituted a penalty. You're not paying back for the damages caused, but you did something that was irresponsible, and we're going to make you pay a penalty. Like a parking ticket is a knas, right? You didn't cause anyone a loss by doing that, but they give you a penalty to discourage you from doing it. Okay, so that didn't work. Okay, let's keep going on in our Mishnah though, because now we say either chatzi nezek of Karen of damages an ox causes direct damages, by goring is mammon, or we say that the chatzi nezek, it doesn't have to do with the ox who gored, it has to do with this chatzi nezek throw at the ox or any animal kicked up. Roth cause indirect damages, and that would also be a mammon payment, and then that has nothing to do with knas, and we don't get an answer from there. Okay, well, we know there's definitely knas cases in our Mishnah. Tashma tashlume kefel. Kefel is definitely knas, that double payment. Well, mishum karna. But wait, there's two parts in the kefel. There's the part that you have to pay back the principal of what you stole. That's compensating. That's mammon. And the double part, so if the witnesses don't come forward and testify about this, the theft, well, you're not going to have to pay back the Karen either. And the Karen part, the principal, is mammon, because that doesn't help. Same thing we're going to do with Tashlumei Arba Chamishan, also penalty. But no Mishum Karna. Well, again, the penalty is made up of penalty, right? The payment is penalty and compensation. So there's two parts to it. Okay, Shanas Ish Ploni Upitat Biti. So there also, Torah says it's a knas. You have to pay Chamishim Kesef, right? There's a payment you have to pay. That's a penalty. That's not compensating for damages. But I already told you, Mishum Bosha Upgam, right? There's the damages you caused, the humiliation for the family, the pgam you caused, the damage to the family, that, or the damage to the woman also. Those payments are monetary payments. So again, it's made up of both. So now they say, okay, wait a minute. If we just establish that all the cases in the Mishnah are not knas payments, they're all monetary payments, well then, my kamashbala, what's the Mishnah teaching you? All you had to say was, if there's monetary payment, you have to pay. So why list all these cases? Kula mamonahu, right? It's all just mammon, so there's no uniqueness in the Mishnah. Well, the answer, Reisha chada kamashmalan and Seifa chada kamashmalan. The first part of this line, and then it's the first slew of cases, or within the first slew of cases, there's one chidush. Within the second slew of cases, there's another chidush, and that's why it was here. Okay, you're curious, what are the chidushim here? Reisha chada kamashmalan, the chatzi nezek trora mamonahu. They wanted you to know that the chatzi nezek damages of trorot is mammon, and that's why they told you specifically chatzi nezek here. Seifa chad kamashmalan sheliki kedishi b'yom kippurim la'afuke mai la'afuke mid Rabbi Nechunya kaneh. D'tanya Rabbi Nechunya ben kaneh yam say yom kippurim keshabat letashlumim ma shabat v'kulei. Right, so there was a unique position that when you get karet, you're also exempt from monetary payment because karet is a severe punishment and it overrides the monetary payment. And this Mishnah wanted to teach you, we don't hold by that position. We hold by the position that since it's not a court instituted punishment, it doesn't override the monetary payment. Okay, and that explains the two chidushim in our Mishnah, and that's why our Mishnah doesn't give us an answer at all to the question of what if the edim are not testifying specifically about a completely exclusively knas payment penalty. Okay, second source, Tashma. Mashpia ani alechem im lo tavo v'tiduni. I'll make you swear, right? That if you really claim you don't know any testimony, then swear that you don't know anything. Okay, we're going to see right now, and I'm a bet. Shotzi ish ploni shem ra'al biti. You don't know anything about the fact that this man claimed that my daughter, when he married her, was not a virgin. Okay, right? The claim was before the marriage she was a virgin, and he gets married to her. He says, "What do you mean? This woman's not a virgin?" And he lied about her. It wasn't true what he said. Humiliated my family and owes me a knas payment. Chayavim. Okay, the edim, if they swore falsely, if they don't know anything about this, then they're liable. Hodami piatzmo patur. If the person admitted, came to court and said, "Listen, I was mostly shamra on this woman," then he'd be exempt. So now they say, what do you see here? This sounds like the rabbi's position, right? Because if you're hodeh, you're going to be exempt. And yet the witnesses are obligated. So this would be knas, would be perfect, exactly what we're looking for. But the Gemara is going to reject it because they're going to say, this doesn't prove anything because you could read this source as being Hamane, Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon. Remember, there was no question according to Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon. Of course, they're obligated because even if the person admits, if the witnesses were to come later, they'd be able to obligate. So you could say this is all Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Shimon, even though the person admitted it, still the Edim could obligate. And that's why they'd be obligated for denying to give testimony. But that wouldn't teach you anything about our question, because our question was asked according to the rabbis, who think that once the person admits, there's no place for the witnesses to come. So maybe we won't obligate the witnesses, because maybe they wouldn't have been able to obligate the monetary payment because the person could have just come and admitted. So they say, how could you say this is Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon? Look at the Seifa, Ema Seifa. Hodami atzmo patur, atan Rabbanan. Sounds like if the person admits, they're exempt, end of story. Doesn't matter what happens later. And that's the rabbi's position. Only Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon thinks, right? He thinks that if the witnesses come later, they could, right? And this sounds like end game. Hodami piatzmo, then it'd be, the person would be exempt. So they say, no, we'll explain it still according to Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon. You could read it like this. Kula Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon, v'hachi kamar. And this is the whole Breita that we just quoted is all Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon, which again, then we have no answer to our question because we already knew from the beginning that Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon will obligate the 18. How do you explain that last line? V'hachi kamar. Lo mishkacha la hodami piatzmo de patur elahecha deleka edim klav hodami atzmo. You wouldn't have a case where he's hodami atzmo de patur unless he's only going to be exempt if there's no edim at all. There are no witnesses to the event. And then the person admits, because as soon as there are witnesses, the witnesses can always come and obligate the payment. So that's can all be explained, and that's maybe not, but it's possible that source is only Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon, which means it doesn't answer our question. We're left without an answer to the question. It's a very interesting question, right? If it's a complete knas payment and the witnesses refuse to testify, do they get Shevuot Edut? Are they liable, the korban, will live your rate for Shevuot Edut or not? We don't have an answer. New Mishna. You say, please testify that I'm a Kohen or that I'm a Levi. Now, there's a bit of monetary thing going on here because you then could get Truma, you could get Maaser, right? You won't be able to collect that if you don't have proof that you're a Kohen or a Levi. But it's not exactly that you're owed money by someone. It's not a monetary payment. We're going to see in all the cases in this Mishnah, it's going to be parallel to the previous Mishnah. You are not obligated for what they do for denying to give testimony. It's not a direct payment here. That's the first part. She'eni ben gushar, she'eni ben chalutza. Or this is just like the first. This is part of the first part still. You're not a Kohen who's the son of a divorcee, which would mean, again, you're disqualified from being a Kohen. So you want to get someone to testify that you're not disqualified from being a Kohen. You're a Kohen, basically. You're not the son of a chalutza, of a woman who went through chalitza and then got married to the Kohen, which would be forbidden. Would make the Kohen disqualified, but he's saying, please testify for me that I'm not. People think I am. No, testify I'm not. Or, okay, that's category one. Category two, she'ish ploni kohen, she'ish ploni levi, she'eno ben grusha, she'eno ben chalutza. Same case, except in this case, it's not the claimant who wants to say, come testify for me that I'm a Kohen, but says, come testify for someone else that I'm a Kohen. Okay, and we're going to see that you're not obligated if you go say, I'm going to testify for somebody else, because it has to be, and this comes up in the Mishnah on Lamed Hey, it has to be that the tovea, him or herself, the claimant has to be the one who brings the witnesses and says, come testify for me. If someone else comes on their, someone else asks, testify for so-and-so, gets involved in someone else's thing, right? That's not a case of Shevuot Edut. Okay, we'll get more to that later. Third category, Sha'anas ish ploni et bito upita et bito. Okay, again, this is also similar to the previous, which is somebody raped someone else's daughter. Okay, come testify that you saw this rape that happened or this seduction that happened, or shechaval bi bini, or that my son injured me. Now, okay, this last category, okay, this starting from shechaval bi bini, is a case of kimle b'derabah mine. Okay, we're going to have three cases now. The foil from the previous Mishnah. If someone says that my son injured me, come testify that my son injured me and wounded me with blood. Now, the punishment is death, not monetary payment. Or or my friend hit me, or lit up my field on fire on Shabbos. Now, if you do it on Shabbat, what happens? You're going to get the death penalty. If you're going to get stoning. If you're going to get stoning, you're not going to be liable to pay money. So all these, the last category, right, and also the first category, they don't have to do with money. Okay, in the middle, we had this also for somebody else. We're going to have to talk about that soon. Okay, but basically, they're all not monetary payments at all, not knas or money. Okay, there's no monetary payment here. So all those witnesses will be exempt. So the first thing we're going to do is deal with some challenge in like an inference from the Mishnah, which seems to be challenging a Mishnah further on. And then we're going to get to 4 sources for where do we know that Shevuot Edut is only in money cases? Never says that in the Torah. I'll read you the pasuk. Nefesh ki tachta, right? Someone who sins is Vayikra Hey Aleph. We've seen it many times. V'shama kol alavu aid or ra'a or yadayim lo yagivin asaf. No, right? Saw testimony or heard knows testimony and doesn't come forward. It doesn't say anything about money there. So why is it so obvious it's only monetary? But the first thing is this contradiction, and then we'll get to the 4 sources that the Gemara is going to bring. Tama di ishploni kohen, di ishploni levi. They're not talking about the middle case where you said someone you're testifying, you bring in the witnesses for somebody else. So it sounds like, well, it's 2 things. You bring in witnesses for someone else, and you're not incurring any monetary obligation because it's just the person's a kohen or a levi. Well, sounds like because that's the case they brought, and not a case where someone owes someone else money, and go testify for so and so that person's owed money. Hamanela ploni biya ploni chayavim. Sounds like if you bring in witnesses and say, please testify for Naomi that Ruth owes her money, but you're not Ruth, you're not Naomi, you have nothing to do with this, right? And it would only be really Naomi that you would have to be, that Naomi's owed money to Ruth, and Naomi comes to bring the witnesses forward. But if you're someone else testifying and saying, someone else who grabs the witness and says, go testify for Naomi that Ruth took her money, it sounds like you'd be chayavim because the Mishnah didn't give that case. Wouldn't that be a more obvious case to bring if that's the case, right? Because monetary already, right? It doesn't say monetary. But Hakatani Seifa, but the Mishnah, Daf Lamed Hey says, as I told you as we were reading the Mishnah, it's only if Naomi brings forward the witnesses and says, come testify for me. Otherwise, it's not a Shevuot Edut. So how do we reconcile this inference from our Mishnah against that? So our Shmuel, Bebaba Harsha. Our Mishnah is saying that, if some random person says, go testify for so-and-so that they're a Kohen, they won't be obligated, the witnesses, if they don't, because it's not monetary, but if it were monetary, they would be a case where that person came with power of attorney for that person. Okay? If they came with power of attorney, then it's as if, okay, so if Yael came with power of attorney for Naomi, she could actually get the witnesses obligated if it were monetary, okay, and said, Ruth owes Naomi money. The witnesses are refusing to testify after Yael asked them to testify. If she's coming with power of attorney for Naomi, then that's as if Naomi did it herself, and that would count. But they say, wait a minute. But in a Harda, they said, when it comes to monetary issues, you can't write a harsha. You can't give a power of attorney for movables. Now here we're talking about movables because we're saying, what's the inference? There's money in that in Naomi's Ruth's hands. It's Naomi's. That's all monetary, and it's movables we're talking about. You can't write a harsha. You can't give power of attorney for movables. So they say, no, you misunderstood that comma there. You can't, Yael can't have power of attorney for Naomi if Naomi's already fighting with Ruth. And then she can't come in and take power of attorney. And that goes with what we saw the other day. Don't get involved in a battle that's not yours, right? But if Naomi takes something from Ruth to watch, and from the beginning says, I want to make Yael my power of attorney for this, since there's no fight between Ruth and Naomi, you actually can do that even on movables. So the halacha of harsha'ah, where you can do it, when it's not that case, when there is a fight, applies to land. When it's land, you can do it, but not for movables. So this would have to say it was a case where, so now you have to limit it a little more. The case where we're inferring from our Mishnah, it's not a Kohen case, but it's a monetary case. It would work if somebody pulls in the witnesses and they're not right? They're not the claimant. If they have power of attorney, and if the power of attorney was given to them before there was a fight about it. Okay, it would have to have been an earlier power of attorney. Okay, that was another ukim to what we call, where the Mishnah is only talking about a particular case. And the Mishnah is actually talking about a regular case, but the inference from our Mishnah is only in a very particular case. Tanu Rabbanit. Now we get to these 4 proofs. How do we know that Shevuot Edut is only monetary? It doesn't say it in the pasuk at all. So we're going to bring to 4 different rabbis who each give a different proof. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Amar Kan Oin, if you ever heard that word. V'namar lahalan oin. What are oin? It's o in plural. It says o a bunch of times. O is or. Okay, so it says or a few times in the pasuk, and it says or a few times in the pasuk in Shevuot Pikadon. So ma lahalan ino medaber ela b'tfiat mamon Shevuot Pikadon. Okay, let's read the pasukim. Never ki tachtav shama kol alav v'hu eid o ra'a o yada. There are the two o's. In the Shevuot Pikadon, where I give you something to watch, you claim you don't have it, and then, right, you swear that you don't have it, and you lied, you're liable. So we saw this before, right? Right? You deny a claim, that you deny you have a pikadon, something I gave you. O b'tzumet yad, o b'gazel, o ashakat amito. There's three O's, okay? The number isn't important, but there's multiple O's in our pasuk, multiple O's in that pasuk. Zera Shavah, we're going to learn from one to the other. Okay, or like Zera Shavah, or just anytime it has O's, that means mum is what we're going to say. The Gemara is going to say. You can't just say every time it has O's, it means mammon, because we're going to bring some other cases where it doesn't. Okay, so Oin to Rotzach Yochichu. Okay, the Oin that appear by a murderer. Okay, if you remember in Bamidbar, second Bamidbar Lamed Hey, chapter 35. So list of all, right, we learned about Rotzach B'Shogeg in Masechet Makot. We saw these psukim, if you kill someone this way or that way or this way or that way, and there's O's all over the place, okay? Mishna, Yadfenu, O Hishlich Ala B'Tzdiya V'Yamot, O Be'evai Kav V'Yamot. These are all cases where you're liable, the death penalty, because you killed intentionally. You did it with hate, you did it on purpose. Okay, so now, Shehain Owen, there's a lot of O's. And there's nothing to do with monetary compensation. So they say, okay, wait. Danim Owen sheyesh mehem shvuah, me'owen sheyesh mehem shvuah. When we're going to compare O's in this pasuk to O's in the pasuk about Shevuot Pikadon, we're going to compare the two because they're both oaths. So it makes sense to learn oaths from oaths and the O from the O. Al yochichu owen de rotzach she'ein mehem shvuah, but the owen of a murderer has nothing to do with anything. There's no oath there. So now they're going to assume in order to learn O from O, you're going to have to say it has an oath. Now they're going to have another problem. O in de sota yochichu, also by a sota it says, okay, avar alav ruach kinav kinei tishtov v'hi nitma'a, o avar alav ruach kinav kinei tishtov v'hi lo nitma'a, o ish asher tavor alav ruach kinah. Okay, there's all these O's in the pasuk, or this case, or that case, or that case. Now, Hem Oin, there's O's. Yeshem Ahem Shvuah, if you remember, the Sota has to take an oath, we just saw, right? She says Amen, that means the Shvuah. When you answer Amen, it's like as if you made the Shvuah yourself, right? So there, Yesh Hein Oin, V'Yeshem Ahem Shvuah. Umidabrim Shalom T'viat Mamon. It's not a monetary issue, the Sota, right? She get the death, right? She get killed. It's not monetary. So they say, okay, again, we're going to limit. When do we learn O's? Well, Tanim Oin Sheyesh Ahem Shvuah Ve'enim Ahem Kohen. Okay, who makes her take the oath? The Kohen. So we're going to learn O's from O's when there's an oath and when there's no Kohen who's instituting, who's doing the oath. Right? So we're going to learn Shevuot Edut, where there's Shevuah and there's no Kohen, from Shevuot Pikadon, where there's Shevuah, there is no oath, there's no Kohen. And don't learn from the rotzach, from the murderer, where there's no oath. And al yochichu on de sota, and don't learn from the sota. Even though they have an oath, and theoretically it seems similar, yeshim ahem kohen. There's a kohen there, and that's why. Okay, that was answer number 2. Owen from Shevuot Pikadon. Okay, sorry, that was answer number 1. Okay, we're going to learn from the Owen and the Pikadon, and then we're going to learn it from the Pikadon, basically. Rabbi Akiva Omer, source 2. Vayaki Asham le'echat me'ela. Remember this pasuk? This is a pasuk in chapter 5, pasuk Hey. Okay, Vayaki Asham le'echat me'ela. After pasuk 1, 2, 3, where we discussed all the different kinds of oaths, then it says, if you're Asham for echat me'ela. Now, me'ela means, right, le'echat me'ela, from these. From these is always limiting these. Okay, it's saying not all of these. So now they say, yesh me'ela shu chayav, yesh me'ela shu patur. Some of them you're going to be obligated for, but there's going to be some cases like this where you won't be obligated for, meaning if you take a Shevuot Edut, and it doesn't have to do with a monetary payment, you actually won't be obligated, right? If they claim you should testify about money, then you'll be obligated. But if it's not money, you won't be obligated. And this is from an assumption that whenever it has the letter mem, which means from, right, it's going to be not all of them. Not all the cases you're going to be obligated. Source 3, Rabbi Yossi Galili Omer. This is a bit strange. A witness has to usually see and know, right? They have to know what they're seeing. Otherwise, what's the point of testifying? But here it says either, it's again, by the way, dealing with the Owen, but from a different perspective, either Ra'ah or Yada. So comes Rabbi Yosef Glili and he says, what does this mean? Well, it's a edut. It's only edut that there could potentially be a case where you could see and not know, or know and not see. And that can only happen in money cases, monetary cases. Okay, what on earth are they talking about? How could you see and not know, see and not know, and know and not see? Well, let's explain. So again, they're only talking about cases, which means monetary cases, where you could potentially have this kind of scenario. So what would it be? How could you see and not know? Because two people are having a fight, and the guy says, I gave you money, and I loaned you, and you didn't return it. And the person says, you didn't lend me money. And the person says, what do you mean? I gave you money on this and this day. I passed you money. And the person said, you didn't give me any money on that day. And he says, I have witnesses that saw me give you money. Now, they didn't know why I was giving you the money. Could be I was returning you money. It could be this, right? But I was definitely giving you money on that day. And you claim I wasn't giving you money at all on that day. And I'm going to bring you witnesses that saw me giving you money. I counted out money and gave you in front of these two witnesses. So to prove that you're wrong by denying that I ever gave you that money, I'm going to bring witnesses that at least saw me give you the money. They don't know why I gave you the money, but they saw me giving you money, and you deny that that was ever the case. So that's going to prove my point. And that if the witnesses would come, then he would be able to have a claim, because again, the other person said, you never gave me any money. I don't know what you're talking about. What would be knowing without seeing? I have witnesses that saw you admit to me that you owe me money. Now, they never saw, what did they see? They saw the admission. They never saw the actual loan, but they saw the admission, and that would be enough also. So those are two cases where you would have to what I do. The witnesses lied and denied that they don't know anything about this. They never saw this or never, right? Then that would be, and that's a case for Shevuot Ha'idu. It would only be a case where potentially you could have this kind of thing, and that's only mom. Because you can't have a situation of that in murder. So the person murdered, but I didn't see who was really murdering the person. There's no such thing. Fourth source, and this will kind of end in the middle, but Rabbi Shimon Omer, it's a little similar to the Owen. It's basically saying we're going to learn it from Pikadon. Okay, it doesn't say from the Owen, but it's similar. We have an oath about this, an oath about a denial, an oath about a denial. Both cases were lying. This is Mammon, and this is Mammon also. Ve'od. Now they add Kavachomer. And then they're going to make a Kavachomer from Pikadon. We'll end here. We'll see the Kavachomer tomorrow. But they're going to say, and if Pikadon is only Mammon, then obviously Edut, which is already more limited, is also only Mammon, and we'll see that in tomorrow's stuff. Okay, so what did we do? Today we started with this last case of the previous Mishna with the two Kitei Edim, and how could that be when must be the second group was already related, was at the time related to each other, even though a few minutes later they won't be anymore, but at the time, and that's why the first group is obligated. Otherwise, there'll be another group to come. They shouldn't be obligated. Then we went to the Mishnah, which had those cases of multiple things, and they were depending on how it was worded, who worded what, would depend on whether they were all liable for each one or just one. And then we got to all these cases which seem like Knas, and therefore the Gemara asked this question, what about Knas? Are you obligated or not? We had to limit according to who is the question, based on two different machlokot between Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, and the rabbis. And from there, we tried to answer the question both from our Mishnah and from another source. But the Mishnah wasn't approved because maybe the cases aren't all Knas, and the other source wasn't because maybe it's Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon's position, not the rabbis. Okay, then we had the case of testifying either for someone else or for non-monetary. And then we really got into the non-monetary and why we know that, from where do we know Shevuot Ha'idu is not monetary. And we had some contradiction between this Mishnah and the other one, which we resolved. That's it for today. Wishing everyone a good day. Shevuot Tov. B'sorot Tovot.